Hi, everybody. It's Al. Today, my guest is Patrick Byrne. He's been dubbed the most interesting CEO in America. He's led Overstock.com for almost 20 years, including their IPO. He's got an amazing background. He's got an undergrad from Dartmouth College, a master's from Cambridge University in Great Britain, a PhD in Stanford, where he's also taught. So please welcome Patrick Byrne to the show. Hi, Patrick.
Alex, such an honor to be on your show.
Thank you so much. So I have to ask you, Patrick, I think you're just amazing. I think you have a beautiful mind. I really do, man. You're just incredible to me. I have a question. In the 2000s, the late 2000s, you waged a war against naked short selling, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you went full, scorched earth on these guys.
I did. It was a show. I think, well, not 6 months into it, I was told this will surely go down in the history of Wall Street. And then it up going on 4 or 5 years. So yeah, you want me to tell you a little bit about that?
I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
So, I got into it through naked short selling, but that's just to understand that. But that to me was just the facet to understand the big issue. Here was the big issue. There's a settlement system under Wall Street. And when you start talking this stuff, I know people go to sleep, but it's really important to understand that when you buy and sell stock on Wall Street, you buy 100 shares of IBM from me, you think that there's some system that's taking 100 shares that I own and it's sliding it to you and it's taking money from your account and sliding it to mine. That's not really what's going on at all. What's going on is so much more complicated than that. Why don't do you have a few minutes? Why don't I'll be a bit more expansive. And then if you want to edit this down and post, I'll tell you guys the history and everything.
Absolutely.
Okay. So no, seriously, if I drag on.
No, we have all the time in the world.
And if you want to reduce this, feel free.
Absolutely.
Okay. What happened was, it's kind of funny. When I was a little kid, my 7th birthday, 1969, I went to New York for the first time, and my dad took me to see Wall Street, to New York Stock Exchange. And I was fascinated. He wanted me to see the capitalism. I was fascinated that there were guys on bicycles riding around in downtown New York in the 1960s. And they had sacks of stuff. And anyway, that's what I remember, is these guys with sacks over their shoulders. They were called stock jobbers. And what they did was they bicycled among the different brokers so you and I make a trade on one day, and 3 days later, these guys are going between our brokers with stock certificates from my account and moving them to your account. That's actually how it worked. And it was very cumbersome. In the 1960s, volume on Wall Street quadrupled. And the guys on the bicycles log jammed. It's just like a database. If you ever work with a database and there's a conflict and it locks, and then that lock ripples out, and well, that started happening and took down a couple big brokers. Actually, there was something called the Great Wall Street Paperwork Crisis from about 1969 or to like 71, 72, where Wall Street was only open 4 days a week, and it was open for limited hours each day. And that was to give the guys on the bicycles a chance to catch up. The SEC got the whole industry together in 1971, and they proposed 2 solutions. One solution was, which the brokerage industry liked, was that they would create some kind of peer-to-peer settlement system. So that process of changing money and the cash and the stock is called settlement. A peer-to-peer brokerage settlement system, electronic somehow. And the other option was something called immobilization with dematerialization. It had only been done once before in the 1870s in Vienna. And the idea was everyone will put all their stock in one big vault. There's just one vault, and then they issue basically what are IOUs for that stock. And then what's really trading around among the investors is really just these IOUs. Well, the industry wanted the first solution, but the SEC forced the second solution down on them. temporarily. It was just, they said the technology isn't ready to do the first solution. So they created something called the DTCC. Actually took a back office of the New York Stock Exchange, and they made it a company. And they said this own legally all. I love doing this. When I was fighting this fight in public speeches, I'd say, hey, raise your hand if you own any publicly traded stock. And of course, almost everyone goes up. And I would tell them, no, everyone with their hand up is wrong. None of us actually own any stock. Believe it or not, all the stock in America, publicly traded corporate stock, is owned. I don't mean just warehouse, but actually owned by a company no one's ever heard of. It owns the stock. And then there are entitlements, contractual entitlements. And so you can think of it like a hub and spoke. And at the hub is the DTCC. And then there's a certain number, dozen or so clearing brokers who are directly wired into the DTCC. And then there's another ring of a couple thousand wired into them. So when I'm selling you stock and I'm at one broker and you're at another, what's really happening is there's this daisy chain of contractual rights. And all that's happening is different contractual rights are different, and these entitlements are moving around. This is a crazy, tenuous system. You don't own what you think you do. Believe it or not, the legal ownership is vested in a corporation that no one's ever heard of, actually owns corporate America. And I know this sounds batshit conspiracy theory.
I believe it.
You can look this all up. The legal ownership. And all you really, if you read your brokerage contract down at the bottom, upside down, backwards in Greek, it's letting you know this kind of stuff. And so why this is problematic is there's really nothing that keeps, there can be many more share entitlements than there are underlying shares. A broker may have 100 shares of IBM, and they've got 4 clients who think they own IBM, and they're telling this guy, you've got 75, and you got 50, and you got 90, and you got 30, and that all adds up to 200 and whatever it adds up to, and 220 or something. But there's only 100 there. So it's fractional reserve banking without a reserve requirement. And that exists up and down that daisy chain. And what that really is a derivative risk that people don't understand is there. Latent derivative risk. And the derivative is a contract for difference. Although it's worse because it's not. Now, this is another thing. And George Soros figured this out. It's kind of funny. The irony in all this is Soros figured out this property that was at the core of his trading strategy called reflexivity, or reflex. Have you ever heard, do they use that expression?
I've heard this word being thrown around in circles, yeah.
Yeah, and the classic, if you go to Harvard Business School, like our mutual friend, and you take finance, you'll learn a certain paradigm of the world. And in that paradigm, what I'm saying doesn't make any sense. In that paradigm, just, there's an underlying instrument, say a stock, and there are derivatives, and the derivatives move around in price. It's derived from the underlying price of that underlying instrument, but there's nothing up here in the derivative that affects the underlying instrument. Just like if you're at a horse race and there's horses out on the field and you and I are up betting in the betting parlor, nothing in our betting actually affects which horse is out there winning. Well, that's the point of view of the guys with PhDs in finance. But just remember, as Buffett says, a guy with a PhD in finance is just someone who spent 4 years in a room learning to talk to others in Greek letters. They really don't know anything about the world. And in the world, it is possible for those derivatives to actually affect the underlying stock. And that's what George Soros figured out. And that property is called reflexivity. So here's the problem. You have many more, one can have many more of these share entitlements than there are underlying shares. So it's fractional reserve banking with no reserve requirement, and nobody knows. That can create situations where one can have short squeezes, which is, I think, the subject of near and dear to people's heart. AMC, what happened in the last couple of years? There were 2, GameStop was the other one.
Right.
And the theory always is, the theory always is that if you end up with, 10 million shares of share ownership, but there's only 2 or 3 million underlying shares, if at some point everyone was forced to deliver, it would actually mean that the stock would be much higher. Another way of saying that is the stock would naturally be here, but because some people are able to use the system to generate excess supply, they can drive the stock down. So this I became aware. So this is the backstory. In 05, some people started reaching out to me. I call them the Pajama Hadeen, the people, this mass movement started reaching out to me in actually 04 and explaining that there were some bad guys on Wall Street who had learned to use loopholes in that system that were actually just created so there could be fault tolerance. So if somebody made a mistake, fat fingered a trade, sold more shares than they had, you don't want the whole system to vapor lock. So there was a little bit of fault tolerance. But the theory became about 20 years ago that a number of hedge funds centered on a guy named Stephen Cohen in specific.
Oh yeah.
Had figured out, well, what really probably happened is in the late 90s, during the dot-com boom, and there were a lot of trash companies that got, suddenly they have a $10 billion valuation and nobody knows even what to do. And that was what the SEC decided, we can't police all these penny stock and all these weird little companies. We're not going to police it. So we're going to sort of we, the SEC, are going to turn a blind eye to hedge funds who want to come in and do some manipulative activities, which just means using the fault tolerance to end up selling much more stock, to shorting much more stock than there actually is to short.
Right.
And they did, and they turned a blind eye. And that's a little bit like some sheriff in a community deciding, well, crime's so bad, I can't solve all of it. So I'm going to give a nudge and a wink to some vigilantes and say, hey, you folks can start taking care of, the bank robbers or something. Well, what happens is over time, the vigilantes start working their way into, eventually they're going after jaywalkers, and eventually they're just, that's what happened. The SEC, I understand, in the late 90s, just signaled a blind eye to misbehavior in the penny stock market. Mm-hmm. And then what happened in 01, 02, 03, 04, they started moving their way up the food chain. And in 04, they got to a $200 million company called Overstock.com, which I had started a few years earlier. So that's how I got into this. And it is kind of funny. Now, that process by which they generate more shorting than there is actual shares to short is called naked short selling. I've learned that people sort of vapor lock when they start hearing financial terms. So I tend to avoid it. And really the common denominator, that's really just one of the problems. There's others. There's something called abuse of the option market maker exemption, which used to be called the Madoff exemption, because Bernie Madoff, when he was chairman of NASDAQ, got the SEC to build this exemption in for market. And it really just became another route by which hedge funds could do this manipulative trading, not for its intended purposes. So certainly the market, so I'll stop there. And do you want to talk about that before I get talking about the political, the deep capture aspect?
Well, let me say this. When I think of companies like yours that they started with, I'm saying to myself, there's an overall big picture here. And I say to myself, think about Amazon.com, right? They're a data provider. They're an IT provider. They're not just, buying and selling and stuff on their platform. I started thinking about Amazon, and I said to myself, who would make the most amount of money? It's companies like Amazon. They can go after companies like Overstock, GameStop, which is merchandising essentially, and AMC, which is a movie theater company, because Amazon wants them to buy and sell off of Prime, the videos and all that stuff. So I'm saying to myself, is there a collaboration going on between Amazon and companies that are like hedge funds and financial institutions that are naked short selling and doing this sort of thing? That's always been in the back of my mind. And the way you're talking about it, it just makes sense to me that, these companies that do this, they're working in cahoots, and there's tons and tons of oversight that nobody gives a crap about. Like SEC, FINRA, and I've seen so much of it.
Well, they're dirty. They're dirty because they know that there's good jobs waiting for them if they go on the outside, if they go along with it. Funny you bring this up. No, in 15 years or more, 18 years of talking about this, no one's ever brought that up. So I will share with you something, Alex, that I've never shared publicly. Somewhere in that process, I was involved with a guy who was doing a professional security guy who was doing, actually happens to be, you ever see the movie Munich?
Yeah, yeah.
The Eric Bana character is actually not Eric Bana himself, but the character he's playing is a
Mossad kid. Yeah.
Say again?
He's Mossad.
Yeah. That guy happens to be a friend of mine. And he doesn't look like Eric Bana anymore. He's a short, bald Jewish guy. So ladies, no one asked me for an introduction, but he's a wonderful fellow. He's actually a wonderful fellow. And he was telling, we met because he'd been working for, he had another client and been working this for years. And when we first met, he told me, you know, in my experience, this happens just not out of the blue. There's some other company, you have some competitor who is actually working in cahoots with the funds doing this. Well, it turns out this was all Goldman and Merrill were behind what was going on in our company. And Goldman was Amazon's banker. And I did hear from a number of journalists that Bezos and who's the guy, who was his big, John Doerr, had this real beef about me, had a real beef. Whenever journalists mentioned me, Bezos would call them and scream. Some journalist gave a presentation at a conference once where he mentioned me, and Emily Bezos and John Doerr went, and some Business Week journalists told him about it, and they skewered him afterwards and such. So it was kind of funny because I had this whole different attitude when I got into the internet of like, we're all trying to build something terrific here. But anyway, it's kind of funny because in the middle of all the fight I was in, there were certain people involved as characters on message boards, and you could tell there were like, a couple of them were leaders, that they would come and set a tone. And then, pardon me, all the, what I call the chogies would show up, and almost like they took their orders from that, whatever that one person on the message board said as the tone, everyone else. One day, it was New Year's Eve in about 2006, somebody made a mistake and they forgot to mask where they were. And they were at the headquarters, and it was the guy leading this whole group of riffraff chogies who do nothing, but there's a couple of people who did nothing, but two people published 10,000 articles about me. That's kind of an odd hobby for someone to do. Oh, by the way, one of them made a mistake once in a Wikipedia edit, and it turned out he was inside the DTC corporation, the corporation that I was accusing of being in the middle of everything. That journalist, his name's Gary Weiss, he made a slip once. It was all documented, and he slipped on in editing something that revealed his IP, and he was inside a corporation, which itself is like getting into Fort Knox. I've been there. You don't just wander in, so that was weird. But anyway, somebody made a mistake, and it was New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve at like midnight, and they were on these message boards leading the riffraff, and it was someone from the headquarters of Amazon. And what was also funny about that, assuming they were not in Amazon at that moment, what that meant was they were on a VPN.
Yeah.
And if they were on a VPN back then in 05, 06, typically it was just sort of executives of any company who got VPNs, when back in 05, 06, it was not so widely spread. That was sort of normal corporate practice. So you add all that up, it means that on New Year's Eve at 11 p.m. or something in Seattle, there was some Amazon executive who was high enough to warrant a VPN, who was on obsessing and sort of leading this attack on Overstock, and they were part of it and sort of directing it among the chogies. So that's all been interesting to me. I don't think I've ever explained that publicly, but yeah, I've always suspected Amazon.
It's always Amazon. It's Bezos. He comes across as this harmless old codger, but he's not. He's quite. I think there's a side of him that he doesn't show very publicly. I think he's a bit sinister, and I think nefarious is a good way to call him. That's what I would say. I will say this. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll tell you stories in our industry. He was he got in early and he had Goldman behind him the entire time.
Yeah.
So I always felt I wasn't really competing with Amazon. I was competing with Goldman, and Goldman was able to just always manipulate our stock.
Mm.
We ended up winning $34 million from a bunch of different players on Wall Street. Goldman was not one of them, but from different people involved for all this. But the data all showed, by the way. So you want to go back to the I'll give you one thing on Bezos. Bezos was anyway. We'll do that some
another day. Yeah,
and he was famous for going around saying we'll buy you to companies, sending in a team to do due diligence and just ripping off their technology. That was the reputation. I heard it around the industry. It's just how it was kind of funny. You wouldn't I guess I viewed it too much as a game, and it's a game, and we're all here trying to build a new world together.
Yeah.
And it's just like I wouldn't go out in a game of golf. Well, I don't play golf, but I wouldn't go out in a game of anything and cheat, because what's the point of playing the game if you're
right?
It just seemed, but he was well known in the industry for doing that. He did that to a couple companies. One were dear friends of mine, and they caught him and discovered that the due diligence team of accountants was actually 5 technologists and 1 accountant. Anyway, so that's really what it would not surprise me, because that sounds like the kind of guy he apparently is, but by all accounts. But let's
yeah. So let me tell you.
Go ahead.
Let me tell you what's going on with AMC and GME right now. So you remember when these clowns got up in front of Congress and said, we're very sorry what happened, and this is a mistake because of liquidity and the DTCC's requirements, and Robinhood said XYZ, and they brought in the CEO of Citadel Securities, Ken Griffin, who is, in my personal opinion, absolutely horrible human being. But I'm not going to go after him ad hominem. And
he's an arm of the Fed. He's an arm of the Fed. He's an arm of the government, frankly.
Essentially, he said that they covered their shorts. Right? Turns out that was a lie. Yeah. Because for the last 11 months, this AMC especially has been shorted probably close to, I want to say 20 billion shares. There's only a $500 million share capitalization, the market cap. And now it's been over 11 months, going on almost a year now. And what we're realizing is that they're still doing the same tactic. They're using dark pools, ATS systems to mask everything. I found out that their ATS system isn't even in the United States. It's in another country. And it gives them some kind of, a critical immunity to some degree.
In the Caribbean by any chance?
No, Singapore. Singapore, very, very loose laws over there. Hong Kong controls it. Singapore executes. The effect is felt in the United States and on the market in the New York Stock Exchange. And of course, payment for order flow. That's all part of the whole thing of 3 ATS. And we're sitting on a ticking time bomb. AMC, in my opinion, when I did the estimation of how many shares have been shorted and what they have to pay back, I don't think we're talking about, DTC has the insurance policy, that $64 billion insurance policy, right? 64 trillion. Yeah. What happened is when this thing pops and it rips from the short squeeze that's going to happen, there is no way Citadel or any of the 52 short hedge funds are going to live through this. There is no way.
That's the theory, but let me give you something. I fought this fight for 15 years, and the theory is, I was surprised at what happened with AMC, because the theory is that at some point that people have to settle their trades. With Overstock, something funny happened. So the SEC in 2005 passed, due to the enormous public pressure, passed a very flimsy regulation against this stuff. It's called Reg Show, SHO. And it was as flimsy as they could make it. In fact, it drew widespread criticism and suspicion that what they had done was, in order to allow this continue, come up with the flimsiest possible rule against it. So, which is kind of a way of letting something continue, so you can't ever really stop it. Anyway, and that's Reg Show. They suspended enforcement of Reg Show twice for they have the authority. So it's a terribly flimsy rule anyway, but they have the authority to say of a company, we're not even going to protect this company's trading in this company with that flimsy rule. They did it to Overstock.com in the summer of 2019. So that they created a carve out where the rules on settlement, even the flimsiest guardrail, was let down for the trading in Overstock. And the only other time they've done that was they did it to Overstock in like 2009 or 2010. They also suspended enforcement of the rules. So it's just crazy. My point is that we dreamed for years. We knew that there were 2 or 3 times many shares of stock held out there as there were underlying shares. And when you looked at the float was actually so tiny. Yeah. It was set up to be the biggest short. It would have been the biggest short squeeze in history. They didn't, and they just never. So we kept just going to the SEC and saying, look, if you just apply the law, we're not asking for anything special, just apply the rules. And they did this. They did this. And that's because, well, it turned out that because of this, that this is allowed at the heart of our lawsuit, what we discovered is it's responsible. It was responsible for 2/3 of the revenue of Goldman Sachs. 2/3 of their revenue came from the stock loan desk, which really amounts to turning a blind eye to this kind of mischief. So it's enormously profitable for Goldman and the major banks, the stock loan business, and the SEC never enforced it. And actually, what's kind of funny, I came up in a blockchain universe, none of this could happen in a blockchain capital market. So I invented this blockchain capital market called T0. It's the first blockchain capital market. And we started moving our issuing stock there and moved trade. The SEC came after for us. In other words, no matter, they are on the side, it's like some southern town where the sheriff's on the side of the drug dealers and on giving them protection. And the drug dealers are in your neighborhood and you calling the sheriff for help, he won't help. And then if you go and try to do anything, like you try to put, a fence around your house or something, the sheriff comes and knocks it down because he's really working for the drug. It's so corrupt. So that really got me into this whole subject of corruption in the federal government. And that's when I became aware and started forming my theories about that.
So with this Citadel and the market makers, because we're the AMC crowd, including myself, are fighting 2 people. There's Citadel, the securities company, and Citadel, the market maker. And there is it's coming to that point where there's no way out for them this time, because that rule, that show rule, I don't think it's even in the books. Is it in the books anymore?
Yeah, it's in the books. It's what it governs. It's what's governing everything now. Reg show. Yeah.
So what we're seeing is behavior by the DTC. Especially when it comes to capital requirements and margin requirements, right? That's going up every couple of months now. And I see a market correction or a market crash happening in the next maybe 120 days, some kind of catastrophic event. And if that happens, the majority of the collateral that they have is going to be almost completely worthless, especially because they're taking out loans they don't use their own capital, mind you. They don't use their own money. It's somebody else's money. And that's when I realized when this thing happens, the correction that's going to happen this year, Citadel is posing itself with systemic risk. And I mean, real risk, because they're not going to be able, they're going to default. They're not going to be able to pay their bills. They're going to have to defer to the DTC. DTC is going to have to start buying shares that are available for purchase. And this thing's going to pop. I knew AMC was a winner, a complete winner, when the California Teachers Union bought in. They're the 2nd largest union in the nation. Yeah. And the fact that they bought, a crap ton of shares, I was like, okay, this is actually going to happen. I'm not the only one that sees this,
The thing I will comment on that is you can understand all the laws of economics correctly and be absolutely right. But after 17 years, but you know what it's like? I have a friend, Arab guy I played chess with. And I used to, and whenever I started to beat him, I noticed he would like knock a napkin onto the floor and then go to lean and pick it up. And as he did, knock the chessboard over. That's just when you think you have these people beat, they change the rules. They change the rules. They knock it over. In our case, it got funny. I invented a blockchain capital market. It's T0. It's out there on Wall Street. It's growing like crazy. And this blockchain capital market, this blockchain capital market, when we introduced that and we started to move our stock over into it, the SEC, since I got public in some other issues last December 15th, the DOJ and the SEC launched an investigation on me for how I left Overstock 2 years ago, notwithstanding the fact that the United States government had maybe more of a role in the facts that created that necessity than they're willing to have yet acknowledged. So they want to get me in trouble for leaving Overstock. And they're going and saying that the system I created, the thing about blockchain is there's none of this loosey-goosiness. There is just like a token. When I sell you a Bitcoin, you're getting my Bitcoin, and I'm, and if my Bitcoin moves to your wallet. Well, we could build a stock market just like that, and the coins would represent shares of stock. So you could use the technology of blockchain, of crypto, and apply it and build a version of Wall Street that no one could cheat. I thought this was great. I thought the SEC would love this. I thought a bunch of people loved it, but the crooked sheriffs don't want that to happen. All the crooks don't want that to happen. And so it met enormous resistance. And now I don't know if I'm still under investigation or not. I don't pay any attention. I mean, I've gotten so many investigations against me over the last 15 years since I started fighting the system. I don't even know if I'm under investigation anymore or not, but they were looking at me saying that creating this blockchain market and moving Overstock into it was an attempt to manipulate the market, which is funny because what the blockchain does is it takes out all that slop, all that naked short selling. Why that's so funny is for decades, the SEC has been saying, oh, naked short selling doesn't affect the price of the underlying stock. Short selling doesn't, no short selling does. It's just like making a bet in a horse race. It doesn't affect the horse. The short selling, all this stuff doesn't affect the underlying stock. So, okay, I invented a system, myself and some colleagues, a blockchain version of the capital market where none of this craziness can happen anyway. And they say that's manipulative. I mean, it's so upside down. It's no, they say that if you eliminate this, if you make it impossible for people to do that, that will manipulate the stock up. To which I say, wait a second, you're the guys who've been saying for decades that this stuff doesn't affect the price. So why is it that if we move it, that's going to affect the price? You can't have it both ways, SEC. You can have it both ways, DOJ. I got all the SEC statements saying how none of this stuff actually affects the underlying price. So just because I created a system that makes this crazy stuff impossible, how can you tell me that manipulates the price? You're the guys who say this thing doesn't affect that. I just listened to you, SEC. I got it right there off their website. All the explanations about how this short selling stuff doesn't affect or naked short selling does not affect the underlying price. So I created a blockchain system where it couldn't occur. And they say, well, you're trying to manipulate the price. Well, do you get why it's hilarious. These guys, they talk out of both sides of the mouth. That's because they're all crooks. They're all fucking crooks that are trying to get hired at the law firms. It's called, so now we get to the subject of regulatory capture. Can we get to some good stuff?
Let's get to it.
Okay, there's a theory, a friend of Milton Friedman came up with 50 years ago, a theory of regulatory capture, Stigler, Chicago. He said that society sets up regulators to protect us from certain industries. But what really happens is those regulators get bought off by the industries and kind of turned against us. The SEC is a paradigmatic example. It was set up to protect us from Wall Street. It's a bunch of Wall Street wannabes who want to get, no, I shouldn't. I mean, actually, I know some people there that I like, but I shouldn't criticize government officials like that. I'm sorry. But in general, it is, people understand that if you go and work there and you're a good boy and you regulate nicely, when you're finished, there's $1 million job waiting for you up the street at a law firm representing Goldman Sachs to represent them in the same cases that you were just on the other side of. So everybody learns the lesson very early, and they're good boys. They'll go after retail people, they'll go after schmucks, but they don't go after the big guys because the big guys are their future employers. And that's regulatory capture. And that's happened at the SEC. And as a beautiful example of it, I mean, taking it to the, and actually there's a Marxist theory, which I subscribe to. He came out of Harvard Law School called John Hanson, and it's called Critical Legal Studies. You know that movement?
Yeah.
Well, out of that has grown this theory of deep capture. That is not just the regulators, it's the senators, it's the congressmen, it's the
Fraudulent.
The newspaper. They're all the newspaper. Everything's captured. Everything's captured. And I'd have to go along with that. And if you want to know I'll pull this to you remember 2 years, something I did not reveal 2 years ago when I punched out of Overstock. I punched out in order to go public about my involvement in some certain matters that we don't have to muddy this conversation up with. But I punched out and explained to people that I had a connection to Peter Strzok. What I did not explain at the time was when Overstock 6 months before I punched out came under investigation again, the person at the SEC who opened the investigation was a woman named Melissa Hodgman. Melissa Hodgman is Peter Strzok's wife. So I got crosswise with Peter Strzok at the FBI, and his wife at the SEC opens an investigation on me, which was really intended to keep a knife at my throat to keep me silent, which is one of the reasons I had reached the point I had to say, screw this, I got to go public. And I went public about some things about Peter.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Peter Strzok, you can look this up. You look this up, Melissa Hodgman. Anyone can look this up. Oh, here's another thing about Melissa, who has, I think they still have an open investigation towards me. I can't wait. I can't wait to get in front of some government officials with a tape running. I just can't wait. I can't wait for that one. But you know, they had 6 investigations against me. Once I got crosswise with Wall Street and started talking about this stuff, they had 6 investigations against me from the SEC. 3 went nowhere, and they had to issue letters of like apology, basically. We found nothing. And 3, they came up with the most trivial little things they could find that's ever been the SEC's ever found. So, but they're coming after me, and the woman who started this is Peter Strzok's wife, and it was really done because of this mishmash between me and Peter Strzok.
That's incredible. I don't even know what to say right now. Yeah.
Oh no, this is the other thing I wanted to have about Melissa Hodgman. She became an assistant director at the SEC hours after the SEC had, when Hillary Clinton's emails.
Yes, I remember this.
Got out. The SEC had some corner of that they needed to investigate because maybe there's some publicly traded company information or something in there. And the SEC investigated. They promoted this woman to assistant or associate director of enforcement or whatever the title was. So she had the rank to manage that investigation into Hillary. In other words, Peter Strzok's wife managed the SEC investigation into Hillary's email. And what do you know? Didn't find anything. How odd. Does this is corrupt sounding to you as it is?
I mean, it's just insane.
Then she opens an investigation on me to keep me silent so I won't dish dirt on some mischief Peter's been up to, which I can't.
We won't bring that up. I will say this much. When I see the new head of the SEC, Gensler, he started about a year ago. He has select mutism. He doesn't do any work. He says he's for the retail investor, and he's made some regulatory changes in terms of PYF, payment for order flow, and all those things. But now,
what did he do on payment for order flow?
They had a huge discussion about should it be legalized? Should it be outlawed and banned? And guys like this is he's so full of shit. Guys like Ken Griffin says, "Oh yeah, if you want to get rid of it, go right ahead. I mean, I don't need it. It's an expense for me." Knowing that 70% of his capital that he makes, his revenue, comes from front running people and their shares. And it's like, are you doing anything, Gary? Are you asleep? So what's been happening is they've been putting up these posters all around the SEC's headquarters in DC, and it says missing. It's a missing picture, and it's got Gensler's face on there. It's like, have you seen me? I have not. And it says I haven't been to work in years, and just making up, stories and stuff, and just making it funny because it's so silly. Where are you, Gary Gensler? Why aren't you doing anything?
Gensler doesn't know it, but he's actually a friend of a friend. And someone he went to hire, actually. And I've actually heard okay things. That I hear he's smart, and I hear he's not corrupt, is what I've heard about Gensler.
You think he's a straight lace?
Well, that's what I've been told. That is not that, but he may be, I mean, maybe over his head, it may be too big a problem, but it's not that he's corrupt. And I
He's
have
a
this
Goldman
with someone I
guy.
know. Say again?
He's a
He's not
Goldman
gonna-
guy.
Well, then I'm not sure I buy he's not corrupt. They do understand that all the slop in the trading is what really generates the profit. And they hate blockchain because it takes the slop out. Although I understood Gary Gensler is open to blockchain. Everyone's afraid of it because they know it's going to totally shift the profitability of Wall Street. What it really will do is suck out of Wall Street the profitability of, you know, having informational edge, like, and being able to front run.
So he comes from MIT. They pulled him out of MIT.
That's what I thought. He was an academic, but he was Goldman before MIT.
Yeah, he made it with his brother over there. The two brothers, the two Gensler boys, made it. But his wife died of cancer, and then he was at MIT when that happened, and then he started teaching a course on blockchain. That's where it started for him, and then he started going into the derivatives market after that. In fact, some of his coursework is on YouTube, and you type in Gary Gensler MIT, his entire course is actually listed, and you can watch it for free. Very interesting stuff. I
had a student in that class is the friend of mine. There was a student in the class who was a friend of mine.
Oh, I see. One of the things that I just don't understand is they tweet him, they call the SEC, they send emails, letters, notes, you know, smoke signals, yet he does not act against any of these short sellers and their manipulation or their tactics or anything. And, you know, there's this thing. It's like, what do you do at this point? What do you do? You know,
there's another expression in economics that it's one of these things that once you understand it, it explains everything. You see it everywhere. And it's called this theory of dispersed cost and concentrated benefits. And can I take a moment to describe this? If talking about government action, so political economy, public choice theory is the area of economics. Take something like sugar. The average American, my numbers are 15, 20 years out of date, but we were spending, let's say the price of sugar around the world is 20 cents a pound. But in the United States, we have a tariff on imported sugar, and it raises it to 40 cents. So the average American spends an extra 20 cents per pound on sugar. You eat about 75 pounds of sugar a year, the average, the average American, when you think of all the bread and everything, that sugar's in everything, even if you're not spooning it into your coffee. So 75 pounds, 20 cents, yeah, it's $15. So the average American is spending $15 more out of his budget for the sugar and everything that's in his than he should in a year. That 300 million Americans, that's $4 or $5 billion, let's say. So American consumers are $4 or $5 billion worse off for that rule that there's a tariff on imported sugar. But that creates several $1 billion of extra profitability for about a dozen sugar companies in America.
Yeah.
And there's really about 3 who get the 2/3 of the benefit. And they go to Washington. And when I looked at this 15 years ago, they were sprinkling around about $15 million a year around the halls of Washington. And by sprinkling $15 million around, they get their tariffs protected, and they continue to make their extra $2 billion a year. So it's a system. You might think of it that political mechanisms tend to ratchet this way. When there's a policy that creates a small cost on many, many, many people and a concentrated benefit, and that small cost, you're not going to go to Congress and lobby to save yourself that $15 a year to get them to get rid of the tariff. But it is worth the time of those dozen sugar companies to go to Congress and spend $15 million a year splashing around to keep the tariff in place. So political decisions tend to ratchet and create situations of dispersed cost and concentrated benefit. And I would say that what you're describing, well, the whole SEC regime and regime about stock settlement is another example of that. This fuzziness creates a cost on the market, and it comes at small amounts out of all the retail investors in the marketplace and all the investors in them. It creates a tiny it creates a very narrow but enormous benefit. This regulatory regime, that they're having the rules the way they are, or not enforcing the rules, as you point out, creates an enormous benefit for a small number of guys like Stephen Cohen, Ken Griffith, and the little ecosystems around them. So the system lurches from neutral enforcement of the rules to let's not enforce the rules. Let's create this enormous benefit for the Goldmans and the Ken Griffiths of the world. And it creates a small cost that is distributed. Well, it creates costs that are distributed to all the investors in the world, all the other investors who aren't inside the game. And that's the explanation of why the SEC really lets persist this situation. And I have one more thing I want to say about that, which is concerning China. Can you give me a minute?
Yeah.
I should probably write this up in a blog. So you and I think, like, why is it that the rule just can't be, look, if you sell 100 shares of stock, you got to deliver 100 shares of stock. That's it. Well, the rule is that you sell 100 shares, you got to deliver the 100 shares, unless the sun's rising in the east and this, that, and the other thing. There's all these carve outs and exceptions. And so guys like Goldman and Ken Griffith get away with failures to deliver that persist for months or years, and they roll them over like kiting a check. So anyway, somewhere around 2010, the Chinese government got in contact and said, we'd like to send an economist to speak with you. Would you meet in the embassy? And I said, sure. I went to the embassy. I wouldn't say anything that would, I decided I would just stick to everything I'd described publicly. So, but I would walk them through what they described publicly, what I described publicly. So they sent an economist over from China, a lovely woman, a PhD, very attractive. My guess is anyway, very attractive PhD in economics. And we had this talk, and I walked her through all the kinds of stuff, but that we're talking about, but in detail, and on my writings. I didn't give her anything like inside information, just all the stuff that I've been writing about, talking about publicly. About 10 years later, let's say that happened in 2009. 10 years later, 2019, I'm over in China. And they said, and they made a big fuss when I went to China. I happened to speak Chinese, and I was a student there back when they first opened up. And they said, who would you like to meet with in China? And I said, well, I'd really love to talk to the people in your, because that economist from China came over, and when she questioned me, she told me, we're building the rules to cover this in China and how to handle this. So I told her exactly what I told the SEC, what you should be doing. This is how the rules should work, and it should force people to have to settle, and boom, boom, boom. Just like you would think it works. Just like when you buy a baseball card from me, I got to give you the baseball card. There's not just, I can't just keep spinning rules around your head. I got to actually deliver what I sell. And so 10 years later, I'm in China, and I'm meeting with these, and they said, here's something interesting. The DTCC of China, or the people who oversee settlement, they said they're not allowed to meet with foreigners. They consider this like people who designed the nuclear weapons. They understood. So here, our settlement system, we treat like it's some backwater, back office, who gives a shit? The Chinese understood this is like the nuclear launch codes, having rigor, having good settlement. And they made special arrangements for these people to come visit me. It was really quite an honor. And they flew them down from Beijing to Shanghai. I'm sure there were a couple spies in the room or something.
Sure.
8 of them minding them, and we all sat and talked. And it turns out we didn't need a 3-hour talk, because I just wanted to ask them, well, how do you handle failures in the Chinese market? Because really what I had been explaining to this economist 10 years earlier was that we don't handle failures in our market. We sort of let them persist. When guys like Ken Griffith do it, and Goldman Sachs, they have all kinds of ways. But how do you guys handle that? And their answer was quite simple. It's funny. The answer was, Dr. Byrne, there are no failures in the Chinese stock market. And I said, yeah, well, I know, but I mean, yeah, I know that you don't want them. It's either against the rules, but how do you handle it when it happens? And they're like, no, you don't understand. There are no failures in the Chinese market. And I still didn't get it. And I thought they were being like just putting a good face on it. And I said, yeah, but what do you do when you have a hedge fund who does this and that, and they use this trading system and this strategy? How do you guys handle it? And the guy sort of put down his coffee. He said, Dr. Byrne, there are no failures in the Chinese stock market. And I got what he was saying, that if somebody acted like Steve Cohen or Ken Griffith over there, they get a bullet in the back of their head, because the Chinese correctly understand what the people are doing is poisonous to our stock, is ruining their stock market, to have big players out there selling stock that doesn't exist and giving IOUs for it. It's screwing up all the price discovery mechanisms, obviously. But because they're not bought off like our regulators are bought off, they took exactly what I've been saying the SEC should do. That's exactly what they do in China. It's isn't that funny? They're so much better capitalists than we are. What would you expect? When they take up capitalism, they do it better than we are. Our system, that underlies capitalism, the capital market, the most important mechanism to get right in one of the most important, it's like the heart and lungs of our system. We've allowed it to be bent out of shape and polluted with all these failures to deliver to benefit, because it creates a narrow but enormous benefit for a bunch of rich guys, and it creates a huge cost for everybody else. So it's just funny that the Chinese listened to me and did exactly what I was saying. It turns out that they'd like drag someone off and shoot them if they play the kinds of games that get done here.
It's funny because Citadel is banned in China. They are not allowed to do business in China. And
I know that, but case in point. That's hilarious. That's exactly right. They should be banned in the US too.
As soon as you said China, I was like, should I mention that Citadel has been banned from doing business there because of naked short selling? They got caught quickly, and they were invited to leave China very quickly.
Oh my gosh, I did not know that.
That's so funny.
That's their core strategy. Stephen Cohen. Well, it's that plus information. There's manipulation of information because they own some journalists, and then they trade in front of the information. So it's something like insider trading, except not, because the information can just be lies, because they're just manufacturing the hedge fund, but they still get the benefit of knowing next week's news before it gets printed, so they can trade in front of it.
Exactly. And he's working out of Hong Kong these days, and Singapore, like I said. And as Hong Kong, as you know, there's all kinds of stuff going on over there in terms of the Chinese government cracking down on things. It's just a matter of time before those guys get their just desserts from China. And eventually they're gonna do something militarily, I believe, and everything's gonna be clamped down in Hong Kong, and they're gonna lose identity. I hope to God they don't.
Hasn't that already happened?
No, I'm talking about real, like, into their culture, because China's one of these things where it's like when the Chinese get somewhere, they saturate the culture, right? People from Hong Kong are very different. They're different people. Their culture is different. All of it's different. So when China comes there and starts to, impose their perspectives, if you will, social perspectives, and impose them onto the Hong Kong folks, I think you're going to see a loss of culture. Look at good example was like Czechoslovakia with the Russians. Their entire culture was stripped away and replaced with Soviet propaganda. When you look at, what is Czech food? What is Czech drink? What does it all mean? We don't know. For 40, 50 years, the Soviets ran the show, and they had books and diagrams on how to, what a communist person eats, drinks, and all this stuff. It's insane to me. And
China did that to themselves. Their cultural revolution, which is such a shame to me, because I admire the Chinese civilization, and the Chinese culture is, one of the 4 great ancient civilizations on the planet. And
I agree.
And maybe it has so much to admire, and yet they came in, with Wenhua Da Geming de Shihao, in the time of it's a beautiful expression in Chinese. Wenhua Da Geming de Shihao. In the time of the Great Cultural Revolution, the goal was to eliminate all these distinctive Chinese
That's
things.
horrible.
And so, oh well.
So we've been speaking for about 45 minutes. What I'm asking myself now is, excuse me, you know, should AMC and GME release like some kind of an NFT or some kind of profit sharing, because then it would force the short sellers to come up and match up and pay their derivatives. I'm sorry, pay their shares off that way. What do you think of that idea?
Well, what's funny, well, one thing is, just so you know, I'm a co-inventor of the technology underneath a lot of the NFTs is Ravencoin. I'm a co-inventor of Ravencoin. In addition, which is how they would do that. In addition, if they really want a simple way to do that, they should just go to T0, which is a.
So Marco Hodes was talking about this, and then they gave him rations of shit about it. Tell me what's going on with T0. Is it a great company like he says it is?
It's a great company. It's growing like gangbusters. It's going to make a fortune over time. Well, once the SEC gets out of the way, but it's actually growing like hell. And I don't have any stake. I had to walk away and sell everything. They were going to destroy everything if I stayed there. Peter Strzok and his wife and others. And so I regret, and of all, I think that T0 has an immense future, but I can't be associated with any of these firms.
Sure.
But they've what GameStop or AMC could do is issue a class of stock, a new class of stock on T0 within blockchain. And once it's trading, then all they have to do is give dividends of that stock to all the shareholders of their NYSE or NASDAQ stock. And once you do that, you're creating a non-fungible dividend.
Yeah.
Now, that is what the SEC and the DOJ is saying, Byrne, you inventing that and trying to do it on Overstock, that was manipulative. Because which is what's so funny, because, you know, it's like this. For 17 years, they told me, the SEC said, stop worrying about this short selling, naked short selling. Remember, at the end of the day, all these people, at the end of the day, it all comes out in the wash. At the end of the day, everything has to be delivered and the price reflects what the price is. Well, okay. So I invented a dividend that after 17 years would have made everything have to be delivered. Well, they say their accusation is that I don't know. When I'm the CEO of the company, I don't have to worry about short sellers. I worry about the shareholders in the company. They say that it might have had to cause all the stock that was naked short sold in Overstock to be delivered, and that would have affected the price. And that's where I say back, fellas, you're the ones who've been saying for decades all of this craziness doesn't affect the price. So why would reversing the craziness? If I created a dividend that made that craziness reverse, why would that affect the price? I think it's hilarious. I can't wait. I want to be in court with the SEC and the DOJ on that one. I can't wait.
They're investigating.
No, I can't wait for that one.
They're investigating them now. You know, the LA County FBI is investigating short sellers right now and naked short selling. And I know for a fact, because Citadel is definitely on that chopping block, because the CEO's plane, they've been tracking his plane. His plane hasn't left the tarmac in weeks since this investigation has started. And the Iron Mountain trucks are starting to circle, trying to get rid of shit.
I bet there's a lot. I remember, and I know something about that, by the way. So that case that the DOJ has just opened up is the one that 15 years ago, I went and said, this is what the short sellers are doing. That's how they're rigging the system. So I'm very glad they opened it up. The SEC or the DOJ a few weeks ago. It's actually based on a whistleblower that I think that the government doesn't know this, but there was a whistleblower. So what happened, and what happens is whistleblowers come to me. I wish they wouldn't, and I'm going to tell no whistleblowers come to me ever again, please. And anytime I say something like this, whistleblowers call me up because they're all afraid to go to the government directly, but they think that if they, and it puts me in a horrible position to be told about illegal activity, because I don't want to talk to the government ever again in my life. But now I know about criminal activity, so it puts me in a real dilemma. So no whistleblowers call me. All that said, there was a whistleblower who called me, a female, about 4 years ago, and started telling me about some stuff going on where she worked. And I spent 18 months trying to coax her into talking to the authorities. And I got a phone call from her about a week ago saying, how do you like this case? And she sent me the links to this big investigation against these short sellers. And it turns out, and she said, that's me underneath this all. I couldn't tell you before, Patrick, but I've been talking to them for 2 years and I fed them all this. And that's the basis on which they have opened this huge case is me. Well, that's a short seller that I kind of not a short seller, a whistleblower that I spent a year or two trying to coax into doing the right thing. So I'm glad to know that this big case you just mentioned actually comes from the work of that woman.
You know, I realized something. These guys holding this position, maintaining a short position, it's costing them hundreds of millions of dollars, right? You figure 20 billion shares, FTDs. That's you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. They're going to eventually run out of money. I mean, it's a capital requirement, right? That the collateral, something's going to happen, some kind of catalyst, or they're just eventually going to, because these guys from Reddit, they're not leaving, Patrick. They are not selling their shares. This is about principle at this point. I don't think the majority of these, because there was a discussion, internal discussion among this community, how high the stock would go, right? And I said, I believe there's enough FTDs out there and shares that this could potentially reach $1 million, for a short period of time. Just the market cap and everything else would be outrageous and whatnot. But the one thing that I did hear, right, the one thing that was very fervent in their minds is the floor for them is seeing Ken Griffin go to jail. That's one. And the fact that they would never sell. In other words, they would never just fold over. They would just hold on to this position until somebody loses their shit. And I think that's brilliant because it costs them hundreds of millions of dollars to maintain the position, and it costs the retail investors zero.
And the dynamics is a little bit like those Chinese landmines, and a lot, I think, or you're a Marine.
Yeah,
I'm sure you know this, or the World War II, those mines that you step on, and like in the old movies, they step on, they don't go off, but it's when you take your foot off.
Boxing Betty.
But if they've got their foot on that stock, and they're spending the $100 million because if they decide to back out of the position, that thing's going to explode and take their foot off it. That thing's going to explode in their face. So their goal is really to never have to take their foot off, to just keep it until it's all the way down. So then they do other things to try to destroy the business. We had Goldman call up our suppliers and try to get large suppliers who had, like one was owned by Carlyle. Carlyle brought pressure on them to stop supplying us. Goldman brought pressure on another supplier to stop supplying us because they had some financial. So they do everything they can. So given that they can't lift their foot off the stock, because that would make it go up and let it go up and explode, their next best alternative is to drive it till it's zero, and not just through the manipulative short selling, but to actually go and screw around with the underlying business. So
right.
They'll go to studios and they'll do things to try to get other businesses to hurt AMC. They'll have their choggy journalists. I'm sure Herb Greenberg and Bethany McLean and a couple, Roddy Boyd will write stories that the guys running AMC are crooks, and just all these stories of,
oh yeah, we've seen them.
Smoke. There's smoke. We don't see any fire yet, but there's clearly a lot of smoke here that really needs to be investigated. And they'll get their DOJ and the SEC to investigate them. They've got the DOJ on speed dial. They got the SEC on speed dial. They can call up and order an investigation. Has AMC had a bunch of federal investigations come at it?
Not yet. What's happening is Adam Aarons runs a very clean shop.
Yeah,
he really does. And I don't see how they would be able to, but I would assume that he'll probably go through the same grief process that, if he goes with net zero or does offer a derivative like an NFT or something, they're going to go after him with such a zeal and vigor that, it'll.
They should go to T0. T0 could do it in a couple of weeks. It's all licensed. It's all legal. They should. And yeah, but it is funny. Was the SEC going to say, wait, that's what's so funny, that if AMC does that, how many shares do they have outstanding? 500 million?
500 million is the market cap. Yeah.
And well, if they go out and they create coins of a new class of stock to issue on the T0 exchange, and they dividend it to all their current shareholders, which would of course expose that there's might be 5 times as many shareholders as there is actual
They're
shares.
still in debt. That's the other problem. They're still in debt. So I don't think they can issue. Yeah, I think
Oh,
he's
they
got
can't
to.
issue.
I think he's got to clear out the books first.
What's hilarious though, that if they get to the point that they can issue that, the SEC will come after them for they'll come after them for manipulating their stock. They don't go after the people who have sold 20 billion shares that don't exist for manipulating the stock. But if you do something that would expose the amount of that in the system, that's manipulating the stock.
Yeah.
I've been in this for so long, I can't tell what's weird anymore. Do you get that? That's
Yeah, no, I
weird?
get it, man. I totally get it. So you were saying if they offer, a class of coin.
Yeah, they go to T0, they create a new class of stock that they issue instead of on NASDAQ or NYSE, they issue in the T0 exchange, and they dividend it out through their current shareholders. That creates a non-fungible dividend, which means that the Ken Griffiths of the world the people who've been naked shorting get exposed by that. And I guess the theory is it would make them cover. Maybe there's other, as I say, my job is just to work things out for short sellers. But yeah, the argument from Coyotes would be that would show that would make the Ken Griffiths have to cover, because they can't come up with that non-fungible dividend to deliver themselves. So they would have to close the position. But the SEC says, well, that would manipulate the stock if you make all these people close out their naked short position. To which you say, well, why does putting it on not affect any stock price, but making it go away does affect the stock price? How does that work, SEC? It's so
amazing.
crooked. It's so crooked. It's turtles all the way down. Do you know that? You're Indian, you told me. Did you tell? You know that story about Bertrand Russell? He was over in India in the 1920s lecturing on Einstein, and a Hindu cosmologist professor stood up in the back of the university hall and said, Russell, that's not how the universe is organized. It rides on the back of a turtle.
Yeah.
And Russell, did you know the story?
I don't know, but I know the mantra. Yeah.
Yeah. And Russell says, well, well, what's the turtle ride on? And the Hindu says, it rides on the back of another turtle. And Russell says, well, what's that turtle ride on? And the Hindu professor says, I'm sorry, Russell, it's turtles all the way down. Well, when I went to DC and I talked to the SEC and FINRA and NYSE and NASDAQ and the Senate Banking and the House Financial Services and the Wall Street financial press, it's turtles all the way down. It's all corrupt. It's all corrupt. It's all corrupt. And the situation persisted for 15 years with Overstock, 13 years. We were on this reg show list. We were on it for 3 years straight. No one's supposed to be on it for more than 3 days at a time. We were once on it for 1,000 days in a row, trading days, 4 years. So it's just turtles all the way down. It's all completely corrupt. That's the lesson I took away. And actually, it may doom America. Our founding fathers understood, Federalist number 10, that what took down previous attempts at democracy, ancient and modern, was corruption. That it's ultimately factionalism and special interest and corruption is what it, if you have a society that's run by institutions and not men, then you're only as good as your institutions. And the thing that destroys democracies more than any other is corruption. And here we are with this open corruption. And there's the Chinese. Chinese are doing exactly what they've been doing for a decade, exactly what I was telling the SEC to do since 2006, which is to make it so there are no settlement failures. It's not a trading strategy. These guys have trading strategies where they do it 60,000 times in a row, which tells you it's not an accident, but it's a trading strategy, and they're just allowed to do it.
I think Gensler's got something going on with T+1 or T+0. Or whatever that thing is. I know there was some talk about
They're at T2 now. They're at T+2. They're going to go to T+1. But the nice thing about blockchain is it's T0 because the trade is the settlement. When you're a little kid and you're buying a baseball card from me and you're trading your ice cream cone, I get the cone and you get the card at the same time. The trade and the settlement are the same thing. Well, with blockchain, the trade is the settlement. There is no separate process that guys like Ken Griffith can manipulate. The trade is the settlement. That's why they hate it. That's why they don't want to see it adopted.
It's incredible. Well, Patrick, thank you so much. I am just absolutely grateful to have you on here. I hope you come back. I hope we can have another conversation. I want to talk. Hopefully the next conversation we have, we can talk about maybe government. I don't know if you want to talk government. I'm a government guy. We can talk government, and we can talk about how to fix the system. How do we fix something this saturated in corruption? I hope that can be a topic that we can cover. And I'm a believer that we should have some difficult conversations, and all the people that are on my listeners and on my followers on here, they're a mixed bag. They're liberals, conservatives, libertarians, you name it, they're all there. It's a mixed bag. And having these frank conversations, I think is a good thing, because it's going to keep people aware and hold Washington accountable.
I'd love it. It's about time. I think we're in final days. Rather, it's now or never.
Yeah. I
It's going to take some Marines. The thing I love about the Marines, it used to be the case that you were the guys who understood the Constitution. It's funny. It used to be the case that the Marines were the only service that swore an oath, not just to the Constitution, but to the president, right?
The president, well, we're called the president's own, because he can send us in times of war without declaring war. So Lebanon, good example, 86. We can get sent to any place, anytime, and we can be self-sustained for 90 days. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, those Marine Expeditionary Forces were some innovation, I understand too.
Yeah.
Were you part of any of that?
I was part of a MEF and a MU. It's something that's really beautiful. What's that?
What's a MEF?
MEF, Marine Expeditionary Forces, or a MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit.
Which is bigger?
I think the MEF is the biggest. It's the hierarchy. Okay. When you're on a U.S. Navy carrier, troop carrier, like an aircraft carrier, you got 20,000 people on that boat. 20,000. You got aircraft, and you got 2 subs at any time in your area protecting you from other subs. And once you start to embark off of those LCACs, those hovercrafts, and you take a beachhead, there is nothing more feeling of that's just empowering is getting off a truck into a foreign land, and you're armed to the teeth, and you are the guy carrying the biggest stick. There's something really beautiful about that. It's empowering. It's primal, man. It's primal.
I would imagine that.
But
that's an experience few can have experience like you.
It is. I had a wonderful time. I met some incredible folks. I had great leadership examples. I learned the vast majority of my leadership qualities from the Marine Corps. How to lead an organization, how to build employees, and not just order them around. How do you build a guy up from the ground up to who you want them to be? That's a skill set the Marine Corps can do better than any organization I've ever seen. And I'll tell you this.
And I know Marine officers too, Marines at every level are so well trained and such good people to work with. I love hiring. I used to hire all the time out of the military. I still do.
One of the things I will say is this. One Marine officer who went to Harvard Business School took a class on leadership. This was back in the 90s. And he came back into the Marine Corps, and I run into him, and he says, everything that I learned at Harvard Business School was taught in one publication that we have in the Marine Corps called Operations Planning, Resources Allocations, and Executions. And it's all in one big pub. He says, you don't need to go to business school. You just need to master this book, this manual. And it's as if you're getting the equivalency of this. And I thought that was amazing that he made that comparison. A guy who went to Harvard Business School, spent all that money, and he says, you don't need to learn this, because it's the same damn thing without the price tag. I thought, what a masterful thing to say. It was beautiful, So,
yeah.
So, hey, let's talk again. I'll get with you guys a little later on, and let's pick up some stuff. What's that?
We'll talk government.
We'll talk government, sir. Done deal.
I'm a little bit controversial these days on that subject. I have some suspicions about the last election that we won't go into here.
Oh yeah, no,
I'm not sure it's the cleanest election that was ever run.
No, I am in the same boat. Very, very murky stuff going on, and it's pretty obvious. I think even my deeply liberal friends were like, "Oh, I don't even want to comment on this." That's what they said to me. I was like, "Yeah, we see it too. We're just not going to comment," which is
And
fine.
I'm not even a Trump guy. I'm not even, this isn't about Donald Trump to me. This is, I think, about a subversion of our country.
Yeah.
And,
Oh no. Yeah.
And a soft coup. I'm not even, it's about Donald Trump to me.
It's just everything was. I don't know. I don't want to get. Let's save it for next week or whenever we talk next.
Okay, fair enough. I'll
Patrick,
send you a little link to watch before then.
I will. Perfect. That's a done deal. Patrick, thank you so much for everything. I'll talk to you real soon, and we'll go from there. Sound good?
Sounds good, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
Take care. Bye
I
bye.
loved it. Bye-bye.